Okay, in lesson 2-4, we're going to start to look at inductive and deductive reasoning. And for this one here, I just want to show you what the difference is. So inductive reasoning is what we talked about the other day, where you have a pattern, and you take that pattern and you make a conclusion that you notice about that. So you take very specific things, and you draw the conclusion from those specific things. For deductive reasoning, it's kind of the opposite of that. We start with the conclusion, and then we're going to take that and apply that to specific situations. And this right here would be kind of the method that you would see, like maybe investigators take. They have some sort of rule for how they solve a case, and then they take those techniques and the evidence and stuff and they apply it to specific situations. So some of the questions are going to ask you to decide if it's inductive or deductive. And I'm going to ask that you just look and see, are you going from specific to general, or something kind of general like a conclusion, to something specific. So for this one here, it says, every time Katie has worn her favorite socks to a softball game, she has gotten at least one hit. Kate is wearing her favorite socks to the game tonight, so she concludes that she will get one hit. So what she's done is she's taken those specific instances where she wore her socks and then got a hit to make some sort of general conclusion. So I would say that this right here is an example of inductive reasoning. And then for this next one, it says, if John is late making a car payment, he will be assessed a late fee of $50. John's payment is late this month, so he concludes that he will be assessed a late fee of $50. So here is the rule. If he makes the payment late, he'll be assessed the fee. So we're starting with the rule, and then what we're doing is we're applying it to his specific situation. So we're applying it to John's situation. Deductive reasoning. So there are two ways to prove that statements are valid. We've talked before about there being a lot of ways to prove something is false or invalid. There's two ways we're going to talk about today to prove things are valid. And the first way is called the law of detachment. And I'm going to write this out in symbols, and then I'll explain with some examples what this means. So the law of detachment, we have some sort of conditional statement. So we'd have something like if P, then Q. So we have some sort of conditional, and we also know that P is true. So when you have this, a conditional statement, if P is, then Q, and P is true, then the conclusion that you can make then is that Q is true. So if I tell you, for example, if today is Monday, then so if I tell you, for example, if today is Tuesday, then I'll work at the Hive, and you know that today is Tuesday, the conclusion you can make is then I'll work at the Hive. Looking at these other examples here, you need to make sure that when you follow the law of detachment, you have the conclusion part being true. So looking at these, it says if 3 points are non-collinear, so that would be the hypothesis. You have 3 points that are not collinear, then they determine a plane. So that's the conclusion. The next thing that you know is you know that these 3 points lie in a plane. I want to know, can I make this conclusion? Is this a valid conclusion that those points are non-collinear? And because they don't tell me that the points are non-collinear and then say they're in the plane, it kind of has this the other way around. This would match up with like the conclusion. You have the points that are in a plane. You can't go backwards and make this. So this would be invalid. And a quick shout out to Xander Salos. He wants to become famous with my extra famous YouTube channel. So shout out to him, and I hope you become famous, Xander. For this next example, it says, if a student turns in a permission slip, so that's my hypothesis, the conclusion is that the student can go on a field trip. That's the conclusion. And then it says here, Felipe turned in his permission slip. So that matches up with the hypothesis. That would mean that we could make the conclusion that he can go on the field trip. So that would be a valid conclusion to make. And then the second law of logic is called the law of syllogism. And again, I'll write that out in symbols. The law of syllogism, you actually have two conditionals. So it might say like if P, then Q. And if you have Q, so if Q, then R. So if this is what I have, if I have if P, then Q, and if Q, then R, and if both of those are true, then you can make the conclusion if P, then R. And let me give you a specific example before we do this one here. I might say something like, if it's raining, then I'll bring my umbrella. And if I bring my umbrella, then I won't get wet. So the conclusion would be, the final conclusion would be, if it's raining, then I won't get wet. But you can only do this when the hypothesis of the second one matches up with the conclusion of the first. So that's really the biggest thing that you need to look at if you can say that this is valid or not. So reading this, if you don't get enough sleep, then you'll be tired. So this is the conclusion of the first. And if you are tired, then you will not do well on the test. So this would produce a valid conclusion. And that valid conclusion, you would just write out, if you do not get enough sleep, then you will not do well on the test. Have an awesome day.